Welcome, weary traveler, to a journey not through distant lands, but through the curious corridors of time. As the hush of night settles around you and the stars keep their ancient watch, I invite you to rest your head and drift with me to a velvet-draped parlor in Victorian England, where science, superstition, and salad all shared the same teacup. This is the story of how the Victorians, in their eternal quest for rest, turned to an unlikely remedy, lettuce. What part of the world do you call home? What hour now lingers where you lay your head? Whether it's midnight's hush or morning's first sigh, you are welcome here. If you delight in slow tales from history, told gently as dreams begin to stir, I invite you to subscribe. There are many stories still to tell. But tonight, our focus turns to how Victorians tried to cure insomnia with lettuce. Hey guys, tonight we're curling up in the creaky bed frame of a Victorian night, one of those candlelit evenings where the oil is running low, the fire's hissing with its last ember, and you, in your stiff nightshirt and itchy socks, are definitely not asleep yet. Your bed is layered in hand-me-down blankets. There's a pocket watch ticking relentlessly on the dresser, and outside, gas lamps flicker while the fog thickens. The moonlight's too pale to be comforting, too strong to ignore. And your brain, well, your brain's decided to stage a full Shakespearean monologue. You glance at the nightstand. There's a crusty brown bottle labeled syrup of lettuce. You squint. Did someone write, "for nerves and women's vapors," in flowery cursive? You probably won't survive this, you think. And not because of ghosts or highwaymen, but because sleep, blessed sleep, just won't come. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling extra cozy, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who else is out there, drifting off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with nightfall, always does. In Victorian London, the sun sets behind soot-streaked chimneys, and homes flicker to life with firelight. You light a candle, and its flame dances like it knows your secrets. It's quiet, eerily so. No phones, no traffic. Just distant hooves, the occasional creak of settling timber, and the ever-present hiss of your own thoughts refusing to tuck themselves in. Even in upper-class houses, where the curtains are velvet and the clocks are gilded, sleep is anything but guaranteed. The well-fed gentleman tosses. The governess sighs into her scratchy pillow. The maid, if she's lucky, has stolen a quiet corner in the attic to collapse into. And that's the thing, insomnia didn't spare anyone, even in an era where hard physical labor, long meals, and dull books were supposed to lull you to sleep. Instead, the Victorians found themselves trapped in their heads, anxious about morality, finances, virtue, and gas leaks. Some even blamed sleep issues on the recent invention of the spring mattress. Too bouncy. Too new. Too full of ambition. You lean on the windowsill. Outside, lamplighters are making their rounds. The glow is beautiful, faint, golden, just enough to sketch the outline of the street and make the fog look mysterious instead of miserable. You imagine people in other houses doing the same as you, watching the night, wishing they could turn their minds off like they turn off a gas lamp. Historians still argue whether the Victorian era was truly more sleepless than ours or just more vocal about it. But what's certain is this: they absolutely loved trying to fix it. They would write letters to doctors, notes in diaries, and entries in ladies' magazines, all bemoaning the cruel irony of exhaustion that still refused to become sleep. Some went for a brisk walk before bed. Others drank warm beer. A few stood barefoot on cold tiles, hoping the chill would knock their brains into unconsciousness. But the real connoisseurs of sleep, the ones who really made an art of not sleeping, turned to lettuce. That's right. Lettuce. Crisp, bland, gloriously boring lettuce. You probably think of lettuce as something you push to the side of your plate. But to a Victorian insomniac, it was a sedative, a tonic, a sacred vegetable of the subconscious. Imagine them in the kitchen, boiling a few pale leaves in water, watching the pot as if it were a magic cauldron. The smell? Slightly cabbagey. Not pleasant. But promising. The resulting liquid, a tepid, green-tinged broth, was sipped slowly, with hope and a squint. Sometimes they added sugar. Sometimes sherry. Sometimes both, which seems like a contradiction, but who are we to judge the sleep-deprived? The belief wasn't entirely unfounded. Lacticarium, the milky substance exuded from certain lettuces when cut, was thought to be mildly narcotic. We'll get to that properly later, but for now, know that lettuce wasn't just a salad ingredient, it was a portal to dreamland. Or at least that's what the apothecaries claimed. Meanwhile, back in your Victorian bedroom, the candle's almost out. The shadows grow taller. You shuffle back into bed, adjust the nightcap that keeps slipping over your eyebrows, and close your eyes. It's still there. The ticking. The thoughts. That one awful memory from 3 years ago that always shows up around 2 a.m. You exhale. Maybe you'll try the lettuce tomorrow. You wake, though really, you never quite slept, with a crick in your neck and the distinct impression that the pillow resents you. Morning has seeped in without permission, gray and unmotivated. But don't worry. Tonight, you'll try harder. You'll go to bed earlier. You'll fluff the pillow exactly right. You'll even pre-boil the lettuce if that's what it takes. See, for the Victorians, sleeplessness wasn't just unpleasant, it was ominous. They believed too many sleepless nights could warp the mind. You start with a bit of overthinking, they warned, and next thing you know, you're writing sonnets to your houseplants or claiming to hear voices through the wallpaper. The insomniac wasn't merely tired, they were teetering on the edge of the irrational. Doctors took this deeply seriously. Medical journals of the time described wakefulness as a nervous affliction, a condition of disordered volition. The mind, they said, was failing to obey the body's clear demand to rest. It wasn't defiance, exactly. More like the mental equivalent of a stubborn toddler at bedtime. And so the culture began to fret. If your husband was sleepless, it meant his business worries had colonized his brain. If your daughter paced the floors after midnight, maybe she was burdened with improper thoughts. Entire lectures were given on the consequences of brain overexertion, especially among young people reading novels by candlelight. Fiction was suspicious. It filled your head with silly ideas, love, rebellion, poetry. No wonder you couldn't sleep. By the 1850s, there was a minor literary genre devoted to this, the personal insomnia essay. Think of it as the Victorian version of a sleep podcast. Gentle, rambling meditations on why the author couldn't seem to close their eyes. Most were full of dramatic flair, like 3 a.m. I count the panels of the ceiling for the third time. The gaslight from the street grins through the curtains. My soul is restless, like a cat beneath a moonless sky. You get the idea. These writers weren't just awake. They were spiritually awake, as if insomnia revealed the truth about human nature, how small we are when we can't do something as basic as fall asleep. And what's delightful, if you're not the one suffering, is how they documented everything. One sleepless nobleman wrote that he passed time reciting the Latin names of his gout medicines in alphabetical order. Another claimed to have cured his insomnia by moving his bed 22 degrees west, so the magnetic lines of the earth wouldn't interfere with his dreams. Historians still argue whether this was serious advice or satire. Honestly, with Victorians, it's hard to tell. But let's say you were a little less dramatic. A schoolteacher, perhaps. Or a grocer's wife. You didn't write tortured essays, you just sat in the dark, staring at your bedroom ceiling, listening to the house breathe. The dog snores. The clock ticks. The floorboards occasionally creak without provocation. You try counting sheep. But Victorian sheep aren't cooperative. They stop to nibble, or trip over their own wool. You lose count somewhere around 87 and start again at 12. If you lived in the city, the gas lamps outside might offer some faint company. But rural insomnia? That was a different beast. Out in the countryside, night was thick. Velvet thick. A sort of pressing quiet that made your own heartbeat feel loud. And the problem wasn't just the silence, it was the expectation that you should be sleeping. That this was your one chance to recover before another day of corsets, chimneys, and judging your neighbor's asparagus patch. Lettuce, you're told, is gentle. The least confrontational of vegetables. A botanical lullaby. And that's part of the appeal, it won't cloud your judgment like laudanum or wine. It simply encourages your body to return to its natural rhythm. Think of it as a leafy suggestion. Some pamphlets even offered evening mantras to whisper while sipping lettuce tea. I am composed. I am quiet. I am worthy of slumber. It's unclear whether this helped. But if you say it while chewing something soft and vaguely green tasting, it might have felt helpful. There's a curious comfort in imagining all these Victorians, across cities and cottages, preparing their lettuce cures. Some whispering over teacups. Others reclining with cloth-wrapped poultices pressed gently against their temples, just in case sleep could be absorbed through osmosis. Still, the fear remained. The longer you stayed awake, the closer you drifted to madness, or worse, idleness. The Victorian work ethic did not approve of someone sleeping through breakfast. Early risers were the moral backbone of the empire. Sleep too much, and you were a sloth. Sleep too little, and you were dangerously creative. It's a fine line. One many people failed to walk. And if you really couldn't sleep, if even the boiled lettuce and whispered affirmations didn't work, there was always the fallback, an hour of prayer. Ideally, while kneeling on something very uncomfortable. Tonight, you tell yourself, it will be different. You've soaked the leaves, added just a splash of honey, and you're even considering that odd tip from your aunt, sleeping with a single sprig of parsley under the pillow. Why? No one remembers. But she swore it worked. You blow out the candle. The pillow feels just a bit softer than last night. A breeze tiptoes through the cracked window, brushing your cheek like a sleepy ghost. And for a moment, just a moment, you believe it might work. You're back at the apothecary again, well, not you exactly, but your Victorian stand-in. Let's say you're a middle-class gentleman of nervous disposition. Or a governess with persistent restlessness of the spirits. Either way, you've decided your sleeplessness has outpaced the powers of boiled lettuce alone. It's time to seek professional help. Or at least the closest 19th century approximation. The apothecary shop is dim and fragrant. Not in a pleasant way, more like dried herbs mingling with musty paper and the faint whiff of something that's definitely leaking mercury. Shelves grown with amber bottles, each labeled in careful calligraphy, elixir of poppy, tincture of rue, syrup of lettuce. Some labels feature tiny sketches, a drooping leaf, a yawning moon, a woman reclining in a most unladylike fashion on a chaise longue. Behind the counter stands the apothecary himself. Round spectacles, ink-stained fingers, and the look of a man who's both mildly overqualified and underpaid. You explain your troubles, can't sleep, heart flutters at night, feel as if your thoughts are not wholly under Christian management. He nods solemnly. You're not the first. From beneath the counter he retrieves a glass bottle, about the size of a modest pear, filled with a murky greenish liquid. It smells faintly of rainwater and sadness. This here, he says with pride, is a lettuce compound. Blended with a trace of skullcap and valerian. Steeped for 7 nights under a waning moon. You blink. That's oddly specific. He raises a finger. But, he warns, not to be taken too close to a cheese supper. It may unsettle the gut. Victorians loved specificity in their remedies. The more precise the preparation, the more mystical the effect. So, lettuce was rarely alone in the bottle. It mingled freely with other botanical allies. Skullcap, to soothe the mind's fraying edges, valerian, for stronger nerves, hops, yes, from beer, and sometimes chamomile, all bundled together in tonics that promise dreams as soft as lace. Historians still argue whether these mixtures actually worked or whether the ritual of taking them was more potent than the ingredients themselves. But in a world where most medicine was equal parts hope and hazard, lettuce held a quiet charm. Unlike opium tinctures or chloroform-laced lozenges, it felt safer. Almost wholesome. The bottles themselves were little works of art. Cork-stoppered, sealed with wax, and wrapped in fine paper labels printed with sleep-inducing slogans. Restful repose for tired mothers. A gentle night without vice. Vegetable calm in a noisy world. If nothing else, they made insomnia feel vaguely poetic. You're handed a small pamphlet to accompany your purchase, How to Take Your Lettuce Like a Lady. It contains delightful instructions, like: do not consume while arguing with your spouse. May be stirred with a silver spoon for enhanced dignity. Best taken in silence, with eyes downcast and thoughts on eternal rest. You roll your eyes, but secretly you're charmed. You leave the shop lighter than when you entered, cradling your tiny bottle like a sleeping baby owl. Back home, the bedtime ritual begins. You boil a kettle, light a small lamp, and uncork the bottle with exaggerated reverence. The smell is, well, it's not bad. Just leafy. Earthy. Like someone tried to bottle a greenhouse in October. You measure a teaspoon into your teacup, maybe 2. Add hot water. Stir. Sip. And as the warmth trickles down, you swear you feel your shoulders relax a fraction. The brain fog clears just enough to notice the fire crackling. The clock ticks. The sheets whisper as you settle into bed. One contemporary report described the sensation of lettuce syrup as a silken decline into the mental dimness of approaching sleep. Another less poetic account simply said, took the tincture. Dreamt of badgers. But of course, it didn't always work. Sometimes it was placebo. Sometimes the batch was weak, sometimes the problem wasn't in the body at all but in the world, debt, grief, the gnawing guilt of forgetting to write to Aunt Margaret. No lettuce leaf, no matter how sacred, could tame those. Still, the act of trying brought comfort. There was something deeply Victorian about treatment for the sake of it. Sleeplessness had to be battled, or at least tamed with good manners and medicinal salad. And if you couldn't afford a fancy compound from the apothecary? Well, not to worry. Penny broadsheets circulated homemade recipes for sleep tonics, with varying levels of safety. One suggests steeping lettuce leaves with a clove of garlic and honey, until the aroma becomes tender. Another calls for lettuce boiled with brandy-soaked raisins and the juice of one whole orange, preferably Iberian. Some of these concoctions read more like cocktails than medicine. But who's counting? A few more daring recipes included wild lettuce, Lactuca virosa, which produced a milky sap when cut and was considered stronger than the everyday romaine or cost collectors scraped this sap into jars and let it dry into a sticky resin. Then they'd dissolve a crumb in warm water and pray it didn't taste like despair. This was your serious stuff. Lettuce for those who had tried everything else. The apothecaries warned, a dose too strong may bring about hallucinations of travel or unseasonal cheerfulness. Frankly, that sounds like a feature, not a bug. Tonight, you sit at your windowsill again, sipping the last of your brew. You try not to listen too hard for results. That's the thing with sleep, it's shy. It won't show up if you keep calling it. You tuck in, pull the blanket over your chin, and let the last leafy traces of your tonic linger on the tongue. If nothing else, you've earned the right to hope. The apothecary said it might take a few nights. And Victorian nights, well, they're long enough for several attempts. Tonight, you go bolder. You've heard whispers about it, the mysterious substance called lacticarium, the so-called opium of the lettuce. It sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? But that's the Victorians for you. If something can be romanticized, they'll dip it in ink and elevate it to myth. You head to your modest kitchen. The lamp flickers as you set down a bundle of slightly wilted wild lettuce, bought from a botanist who looked at you like you knew too much. You remember his warning, scrape at dusk. Let it weep in peace. Right. So here you are. Dusk. And the lettuce weeps. Technically speaking, lacticarium is a milky latex that oozes from the stems of certain species of lettuce, especially Lactuca virosa, the wild lettuce. You slice it with a dull knife, and sure enough, little beads of white sap emerge, slow and reluctant. It smells faintly bitter, like if sadness grew on a vine. You collect the sap onto a piece of glass and let it dry. Then, following a handwritten guide from 1847, you dissolve the dried residue into a few tablespoons of hot water and stir slowly, whispering a little prayer that sounds suspiciously like the Lord's Prayer rewritten for vegetables. The liquid turns a pale gray. You drink it. It tastes like chalky earth and old promises. Historians still argue whether lacticarium had any real sedative effect or whether it was just the placebo of ritual, the cutting, the drying, the hope. Some chemical analysis suggests mild sedative compounds do exist in the sap. Others say you'd need so much lettuce, you'd be more likely to die from boredom before you reached an effective dose. But Victorians didn't need hard proof. They needed story. And wild lettuce had a story. It was mentioned by ancient Romans. Apothecaries whispered that it had calmed Queen Elizabeth I before bed. Was it true? Probably not. But it made the tonic taste a bit more convincing. In London's sleep-deprived circles, wild lettuce became a quiet obsession. Wealthy amateurs turned parts of their conservatories into lettuce labs, growing tall stalks under glass and harvesting by moonlight. They'd compare notes in salons, how long to let the sap dry, what ratio to dissolve, whether a copper spoon improved the flavor. There were even lettuce clubs. Societies of somnolence, they called themselves. Imagine it, 12 people sitting in overstuffed chairs, sipping tiny cups of bitter tea and nodding politely while someone reads aloud from On the Etiquette of Rest. Of course, not everyone had access to exotic lettuce species or the patience to milk a plant like a very uncooperative cow. For the average Victorian, pre-made lacticarium tincture could be purchased, if you knew the right pharmacist. Labels were coded, L. Soporifera, Nocturnum Blend, or simply Moon Extract. You can almost picture the smug satisfaction of someone pulling a small black bottle from a jacket pocket at a dinner party, whispering to a fellow guest, 3 drops, and I dream of floating. One particularly theatrical reviewer wrote in a newspaper, I consumed a dose at 10:30. By 11, I felt as though my bones had become velvet. I dreamt of fog, and of being fog, and awoke feeling neither here nor there. And yet, there were cautionary tales. One woman claimed she'd taken too much and spent the night trying to reason with her bed frame, which had apparently taken offense to her posture. Another man insisted he had left his body, briefly, to attend a spiritual conference in Kent. Still, it's important to remember that everything in Victorian times had the potential to turn slightly spiritual. If you had a vivid dream, it wasn't just your imagination, it was a visitation. A portent. A lettuce-induced window into your higher self. Not to be outdone, a few religious groups tried to ban wild lettuce entirely, claiming it led to sloth, mysticism, and overfamiliarity with the shadow world. The ban didn't stick. Because let's face it, no one's organizing a lettuce-fueled revolution. Unless it's a very quiet one, scheduled for after tea. Tonight, after your own taste of homemade lacticarium, diluted and modest, you promise, you lie in bed with that floating feeling. You're not entirely sure if it's the extract or the satisfaction of having prepared it yourself. Either way, your limbs feel like furniture in a room that's just been dusted. The ticking clock seems farther away now. The sheets no longer cling. You don't hear your thoughts as much as observe them, like fireflies bumbling around a quiet field. And then a strange image enters your mind, a lettuce leaf, floating gently down a river, turning slowly in the current. You think, this is silly. And you smile, because silly is sometimes all it takes to sleep. It's one thing to drink lettuce. It's quite another to eat it on purpose, for sleep. But that's precisely what many Victorian ladies and their cookbooks recommended, dreamy dishes prepared with soft, sedative greens, served not for nutrition but for drifting. You're in a modest townhouse kitchen now. The cook is elbow-deep in pastry dough, but she looks up when you enter with a bushel of lettuce and a hopeful smile. "Trouble sleeping again, is it?" she asks knowingly, wiping her hands on her apron. "We'll fix that. Tonight's menu? Braised lettuce with milk and nutmeg." It doesn't sound like much, and it isn't, but the Victorians believed deeply in the ritual of eating specific foods before bed, meals gentle on the stomach and heavy on symbolism. The lettuce is chopped, simmered in milk until soft, and then seasoned just enough to resemble a flavor. Nutmeg was a favorite in the period, believed to have soporific effects. Modern science suggests it does, at very high doses, and also potentially hallucinogenic ones. But in Victorian portions, it was more likely a placebo with a charming scent. You sit down at the table. The dish steams gently. It looks beige. It tastes of warmth and compromise. And you're okay with that. Cookbooks from the mid-1800s were filled with recipes that today would confuse a Michelin inspector. Lettuce stew, lettuce broth, savory lettuce pudding, all offered as nighttime restoratives. Even fancier houses got in on the trend. There are accounts of duchesses requesting lettuce sandwiches with cooling herbs, served in silence before bed. Silence was very important, apparently. Talking too much before bed could disrupt the digestion and agitate the pulse. Historians still argue whether this dietary trend was rooted in science or class-based delicacy. Was lettuce simply one of the few things available that felt refined yet humble enough to be medicinal? Or did they truly believe it could nudge the body toward slumber with each bite? Some recipes are just precious. One titled Lettuce à la Newt calls for gently roasting lettuce in beef drippings, then pouring over it a cream-thickened gravy infused with sage and fennel. Supposedly, the aroma alone could make one drowsy as a nursing babe. It's the food equivalent of a warm bath, less about flavor, more about message. You are safe. You are still. You may rest now. Among the upper middle class, lettuce tables became a thing. This was essentially a pre-bedtime tea service, but instead of cakes, the offerings were delicate lettuce-based finger foods, often served with weak chamomile and slightly condescending conversation. Ladies would sit on tufted divans and nibble their way through dainty cups of creamed lettuce soup, as if trying to whisper their way into unconsciousness. For children, the fare was sweeter. Lettuce broth with sugar, lettuce and apple pudding, even boiled lettuce with bits of dried fruit. The theory was to sweeten the temperament through sweetened food. Victorians were nothing if not metaphorical in their medicine. Of course, this practice wasn't limited to the parlor or nursery. Even hospitals joined in. A medical report from 1872 notes that patients recovering from fever were given lettuce jelly to help soothe their nerves. The ingredients included clarified stock, gelatin, lettuce puree, and a touch of lemon zest. The result, a faintly green blob that wobbled with medicinal sincerity. You imagine yourself at a bedside, spooning a trembling scoop of this wobbly comfort into your mouth, hoping not for flavor, but for the blank softness of dreamless sleep. There were even social rumors that a royal physician once recommended lettuce custard to Queen Victoria herself, though no official record confirms this. Still, the idea persists in quiet corners of culinary history, an empress sipping pale green custard beneath velvet drapes, hoping to forget the pressures of empire just long enough to nap. Tonight, you prepare your own version. You don't have beef drippings or silver spoons, but you boil some romaine, mash it with warm milk, and season it with the tiniest hint of clove. You add a bit of honey, not because the cookbook says to, but because you want the thing to feel like a treat. As you eat, slowly, in silence, you wonder whether this is the part that matters most. Not the lettuce, or the clove, or even the honey, but the act of choosing to slow down. The quiet chewing. The warm, soft bite. The body being reminded that it's not under siege. That maybe tonight, sleep will be gentle. Outside, the lamplighter makes his rounds. You can hear the faint clink of the pole against glass. A soft fog has crept over the windowsill. The house creaks, not ominously, but like a content cat shifting its weight. You place your empty bowl on the nightstand. It steams faintly. The spoon rests like a curled fern. You lie back. Not because you're sleepy, yet, but because you've begun to believe you might be. Tonight, you find yourself in the parlor again, not to entertain guests or do embroidery, but to consult the true authority on sleep, your grandmother's remedy book. It's bound in cracked leather, pages soft at the edges, the ink slightly smudged from generations of anxious fingers. The title, embossed in fading gold, reads, Mrs. Applethwaite's Household Prescriptions and Gentlewoman's Comforts. Not exactly peer-reviewed medical literature, but more trusted than most physicians in this house. You flip past the pages on sore throats and chilblains, past the chapter on melancholy of the widow's type, until you reach a modest heading. To tempt slumber in the restless or laced. Take leaves of tender lettuce, well rinsed, steeped in warm whey and honey. Administer at dusk with soft lighting and no moral concerns upon the mind. That last line is doing a lot of work. No moral concerns? In Victorian society? You might as well ask for unicorn liver. Still, it's comforting, this idea that someone before you also sat up nights, seeking a way to tiptoe into sleep. The margins of the recipe are full of looping notes. Add rose water for nerves. Mother used this on Aunt Joni during the thunderstorm. Good with nutmeg, but not too much or the dreams become odd. Your grandmother's handwriting changes across the pages. In the early entries, it's neat and precise. Later, the loops become wider, more relaxed, like she finally learned to trust herself, or the lettuce. There's something quietly revolutionary about women documenting their own healing practices in an era where doctors largely dismissed them. These remedy books were passed down like secret spells, annotated with real experience and gentle corrections. They were cookbooks of comfort, medical records of the heart, and sleep manuals all in one. Historians still argue whether these journals should be classified as folk medicine or simply domestic wisdom. But the truth is, they bridged the gap between superstition and science in a way no formal text ever could. You follow the recipe. Lettuce, whey, a teaspoon of honey. It's not gourmet, but it feels right. You sip it slowly in the parlor chair, wrapped in a shawl that smells like lavender and dust. The ticking of the mantel clock seems less accusatory tonight. You turn the page. Another entry. Miss Adlington swears by stewed lettuce with parsley root, taken with quiet hymns. We tried it last Tuesday. Not unpleasant. You chuckle softly. You can practically see Miss Adlington, frizzed hair, upright posture, muttering Rock of Ages between spoonfuls of soggy greens. Not unpleasant, indeed. Some entries get bolder. If true sleep is not achieved, place a warm compress of lettuce leaves over the brow. Secure with ribbon. This may frighten the housemaid, but it has proved effective in 4 cases. You imagine lying there, forehead wrapped like a salad, the poor maid dropping a tray in shock. But if it worked? The book isn't all lettuce, of course. There are pages devoted to lavender sachets, mugwort pillows, and even a rather enthusiastic entry on soaking your feet in mustard water. But lettuce, humble, pliable lettuce, appears again and again. What makes it so enduring, you wonder? Perhaps it's the idea that something so unassuming could quietly lull the body. Lettuce doesn't make demands. It doesn't sedate you into oblivion. It just suggests sleep in the same way a warm bath suggests forgiveness. Your grandmother's final note on the subject is written in large, looping letters, tucked into the margin of the page. Sleep never comes when commanded, but often arrives when you are gently kind to yourself. You pause. Let that settle in. You close the book and rest it on the side table. The parlor is quiet now, fire reduced to coals, the world outside muffled under a velvet hush. You bring your shawl closer and lean your head back. Maybe you'll sleep here tonight. Maybe not. But somehow, with the taste of honeyed whey still lingering on your lips and your grandmother's wisdom in your chest, it feels less urgent. Less like a war, more like an invitation. And as your eyelids start to dip, not fully, just enough to blur the room, you whisper aloud. Thank you, lettuce. And thank you, Nana. Some nights, even warm whey and grandmotherly wisdom aren't enough. So, you escalate, to steam, sweat, and compresses. Tonight, you're not just drinking lettuce. You're wearing it. In true Victorian fashion, your body becomes the battleground for your insomnia. You light a fire, boil water, and prepare for the spa nightmare that is the lettuce poultice. Yes, that's right, steamed leaves wrapped in muslin and tied gently, or not so gently, to your temples, wrists, or even the soles of your feet. Draws out the fever of the mind, they say. Calms the twitching nerves, they promise. Leaves your pillow slightly damp, they forget to mention. You start with a quick rinse of the leaves. You're instructed not to use overly bitter lettuces, so romaine it is. Then, you steam them until they're just limp, still green but soggy, like a napkin left in tea. You lay them flat on cloth squares, fold them neatly, and apply them to your forehead and chest. The sensation is peculiar. Warm. Damp. Slightly squishy. Like someone has gently placed a cooked salad onto your skin with the best of intentions. But this was no joke in Victorian times. The poultice was a core component of at-home healing. Everything from chest colds to headaches to heartbreak might warrant one. And lettuce had its place, praised for its cooling humors and docile plant energy. Which sounds suspiciously like early aromatherapy marketing, but hey, branding is everything. You're wrapped now, bundled like a sleepy casserole, when you remember the second part of the ritual, flannel. Victorians loved flannel. It was their solution to almost every physical complaint. Cold feet? Flannel socks. Wheezing cough? Flannel bandage. Night terrors? Full-body flannel wrap plus a firm prayer. You fetch your thickest nightshirt, the one that scratches a bit, and layer it on, followed by a dressing gown heavy enough to count as a personality trait. Now you're sweating. That's intentional. The theory was this: if your body expelled enough agitating vapors, your mind would calm, and sleep would flow in like a forgiving tide. This is why so many old remedy books included sweat lodges, steam closets, and our dear friend, the lettuce compress, in their arsenal. Historians still argue whether these treatments offer true physiological benefits or simply acted as exhausting distractions. After all, preparing poultices, boiling kettles, and binding yourself in flannel isn't exactly relaxing. But maybe that was the point. Make your body work so hard to fall asleep that it eventually gives up and does. Then there's the lettuce bath. Yes, this was real. You take a large pot, fill it with water and lettuce, preferably wild lettuce, if you're feeling dramatic, and boil it for an hour. The smell? Somewhere between overcooked cabbage and botanical regret. Then you strain out the leaves, pour the green-tinted broth into a tub, and soak. One newspaper described the experience as steeping the soul in vegetative mercy. Another writer claimed she emerged from the bath with limbs like butter and a heart soft as pastry. You imagine yourself lowering into that lukewarm, slightly viscous water, surrounded by faint lettuce steam and the echo of your own dubious choices. It's silly, yes. But it's also oddly soothing. Not just because of the lettuce, but because of the slowness of it all. That's the thing. none of these rituals were fast. And that's kind of the point. Sleep, in the Victorian era, wasn't something you hacked. It wasn't a pill or a button. It was a ceremony. A layering of efforts. A quiet declaration that your body mattered, your comfort had meaning, and your racing thoughts could be softened with enough flannel, steam, and leaves. One magazine even suggested adding a few drops of rose or violet tincture to the lettuce bath for extra tranquility. You do. Why not? You soak. You sweat. You wonder vaguely if anyone's ever drowned in a bath of lettuce water. Probably not. Probably. And when you finally crawl into bed, compress removed, skin faintly vegetal, the scent of rose lingering, you feel different. Not knocked out. Not sedated. But prepared. Like a well-oiled door, ready to swing open to wherever sleep might be hiding. The bed welcomes you like it forgot last night's rejection. The pillow doesn't fight back. The air smells green and tired. And somewhere, deep in your now soggy pores, a lettuce leaf whispers. You're getting closer. You wake at dawn with the distinct sensation of having slept a bit, which is progress. Your forehead still smells faintly of boiled romaine. But the real shift is internal, a tiny sliver of confidence that tonight's sleep might actually arrive on time. That maybe you've earned it. But if you think insomnia was only a problem for the delicate, flannel-wrapped elite, think again. It wasn't just governesses sipping lettuce broth or duchesses bathing in green water. Sleep, or the lack of it, was a quiet epidemic, one that sliced through class lines like a sharpened butter knife. Let's leave the townhouse now. Step outside. Down the cobbled street. Past the butcher, the chemist, the fog-draped lampposts, and into the back alley tenements. Here, the rooms are smaller, the walls thinner, the beds coarser. Straw-stuffed mattresses, if you're lucky. Hammocks or floorboards, if you're not. The air smells like soot and boiled potatoes. You can hear coughing through the wall, footsteps overhead, the occasional clatter of boots being dropped from exhaustion rather than care. Insomnia, here, isn't poetic. It's practical. It's about light that never fully fades because someone in the next room works the night shift. It's about children who wake coughing, babies who won't settle, an anxiety that hums in your chest like a coal cart on iron rails. And yet, lettuce finds its way here, too. You might not afford tinctures or silver spoons, but you can boil the outer leaves of market scrap lettuce in tin kettles. You sip it by the light of a stubby candle. No ceremony. Just necessity. One cup, maybe two, before crawling onto a sagging pallet, hoping the warm liquid dulls the ache in your calves and the noise in your head. In this world, sleep is not about dreams, it's about recovery. The body must rest because tomorrow begins again at 5 a.m., and the laundry won't wash itself. Historians still argue whether working-class Victorians truly suffered more insomnia, or whether their exhaustion overrode it. But personal diaries and social reports suggest something more nuanced, that sleeplessness took different shapes depending on your circumstances. The gentry had insomnia, with time to name and analyze it. The poor had tiredness, just another problem among many. But they still wanted remedies. And lettuce, being common, growable, and flexible, was among the few that felt accessible. One factory widow in Manchester wrote in a letter to her sister, "Boiled the green leaves again tonight. Not much good, but the rituals become nice. The children think it's a magic potion. I tell them it's made from clouds. It's a little heartbreaking, and a little beautiful. The notion that even when comfort is scarce, ritual can be offered like a small bouquet. That boiled lettuce might not bring true sleep, but it brings the illusion of doing something. And sometimes, that's enough." Let's visit a lodging house now. Four men share a single room, rotating the mattress like it's a communal secret. One of them, a coach driver with a twitch in his eye and a battered tin cup, swears by cold lettuce tea and a foot rub. He won't explain the foot rub. No one asks. Another man, a night watchman, stares out the grimy window between shifts. He claims lettuce works better when whispered to before brewing. Tell it your troubles, he says. It softens the bitterness. You'd think such beliefs would be mocked, but no. In this world, superstition lives quietly alongside science. If it helps you sleep, even for 10 minutes, it's truth enough. There's one curious case from 1879. A group of textile workers in Leeds pooled their wages to buy a weekly head of lettuce, which they split 6 ways, steeped, and drank together before bed. They called it their peace leaf. Every Sunday. No exceptions. Not because it cured their aches or guaranteed REM sleep, but because the act of gathering, of slowing down for 20 minutes, made the unbearable week seem gentler. They couldn't afford velvet sheets or flannel wraps. But they had leaves. And they made do. And now, you're lying here again, back in your own imagined Victorian room, realizing that class shaped everything about how sleep was approached. From feather pillows to straw mats, from delicate silver spoons to tin cups and scorched kettles. But in the end, everyone wanted the same thing: stillness. Relief. The soft blur between days. You roll onto your side, tucking your hand under your cheek. A breeze lifts the curtain. Somewhere, a neighbor coughs. The lettuce water has long worn off, but its comfort lingers, like the warmth from someone else's coat draped gently over your shoulders. You think of those factory workers sipping tea like monks. And you think, sleep might not be fair, but it can still be shared. You might assume that the wealthier Victorians, with their silk sheets, goose-down pillows, and mahogany bed frames, slept better than anyone else. And yet, you'd be wrong. Because in the hushed bedrooms of the well-to-do, insomnia had a different flavor, gilded and anxious. Imagine it. You're in a grand house in Belgravia. The room is nearly silent, too silent. Thick velvet curtains choke out the sounds of the city. The mattress is a cloud of luxury. There are no mice in the walls, no creaking floorboards overhead, no baby crying next door. And yet you're wide awake. You stare at the ceiling's intricate plasterwork, counting the floral patterns. 1, 2, 3 clusters of roses. Then a cluster of ivy. Then you start over, because ivy counts as different. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimes, 1:30. You toss. You turn. The monogrammed pillowcases taunt you with their softness. What keeps you up? Money, ironically. Victorians with money had a lot to lose. Investments in colonial ventures, concerns over marriage contracts, the rising cost of sugar, the fear that your eldest son is a poet instead of a banker. These thoughts swirl and settle like bad ink in a crystal decanter. There's also the matter of appearances. Sleeplessness wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unseemly. Ladies were expected to be fresh and dewy in the morning, their complexions unmarred by dark circles. Gentlemen were to be sharp, attentive, and free of any suggestion that their minds might be unruly. So, of course, they obsessed over it. Household manuals devoted entire chapters to restful habits of the cultured classes. These included such gems as: avoid discussing politics after supper. Do not indulge in second helpings of pudding, as this excites the blood. End all social engagements with a quiet half-hour of reflection and lavender water. Historians still argue whether these habits were rooted in genuine health advice or simply class signaling. After all, if your life affords you the luxury of 30 minutes to reflect before bed, you're already leagues away from the tenement dwellers boiling lettuce in tin cups. But even with all the best advice, the upper classes still suffered. And when sleep didn't come, they turned to solutions, many of them leafy. Wealthy households employed cooks who prepared elaborate pre-bed restoration trays. These often included stewed lettuce with marrow, buttered toast lightly kissed with laudanum, yes, that laudanum, chamomile jellies, milk mixed with lettuce sap and a hint of rose, And for those who couldn't rely on food alone, there were the treatments. One lady's journal from 1866 describes how her physician prescribed her a lettuce plaster for the heart, to be worn over the chest with a satin ribbon and replaced nightly. She reported improved sleep, but also admitted that her maid said she smelled like a well-mannered salad. Some Victorian sleep treatments bordered on performance art. Aromatherapy trays with sliced lettuce and lemon. Silver bowls of lettuce water set beside the bed to catch disruptive dreams. One particularly eccentric baronet in Bath commissioned a mattress stuffed with dried lettuce leaves. He claimed the rustling helped drown out his inner monologue. But wealth didn't insulate anyone from the core truth: sleep cannot be bought. Not really. Because at the end of the night, you still lie down with your own mind. And if your mind has a flair for drama, well, no amount of creamed lettuce will stop it from staging a one-man show at 2 a.m. You picture a gentleman pacing the drawing room in embroidered slippers, sipping cold lettuce wine and muttering about wheat prices. You imagine a countess frowning into her dressing mirror, wondering whether her sleeplessness is due to passion, indigestion, or spiritual unrest. And you, wrapped in your imaginary nightgown, realize that while your bed may be simpler, your fears are not so different. Sleep is democratic in its withholding. It turns away kings and stable boys with equal apathy. It doesn't care about inheritance or etiquette or which boarding school your nephew attends. Still, the rituals help. The lettuce broth. The soft robe. The turning down of the lamps. The act of preparing for rest, even when rest does not come. And so you lie there, tonight, not resentful but companionable with your own wakefulness. You imagine all the Victorians, rich and poor alike, doing the same. Holding warm cups. Watching moonlight creep across the wall. Waiting. Because sometimes, the waiting is the ritual. And sometimes, that's enough. It's nearly midnight again, and you're not the only one awake. In a cozy nursery 2 floors above the drawing room, a small Victorian child is also wrestling with sleep. Only instead of a pillow fight or too much sugar, it's a combination of cold toes, fear of eternal damnation, and a truly baffling bedtime story about a ghost nun that their cousin whispered during supper. Let's talk about children and sleep, the sleeplessness of the tiny, the twitchy, and the perpetually curious. Because in the Victorian world, children were expected to behave like small adults, quiet, polite, morally upright, and preferably asleep by 8. A child with too much energy at bedtime wasn't seen as merely wired. No, they were spiritually agitated, or struck by unnatural vitality, as one physician so delicately put it. Naturally, there were cures. And yes, lettuce found its way into the nursery, too. Tonight, your imaginary nanny, stern but kindly, prepares a small copper pot of warm lettuce broth with just a touch of molasses, poured into a chipped cup and offered like a chalice. For your dreams, darling, she says. So they'll be soft and not full of frogs again. Children were given all sorts of quieting concoctions, lettuce stews, warm milk with shredded leaves, even bread soaked in lettuce water. The theory was that the green humors of lettuce would pacify their wild imaginations, sending them to sleep without fuss. Because fuss, to a Victorian parent, was basically moral decay with a nightshirt on. You sip your own tea in solidarity. Historians still argue whether these nursery sleep routines were more about controlling children or genuinely helping them rest. It's likely both. Victorian society adored the idea of obedient, pale children slumbering in white beds, symbols of purity and discipline. A wide-eyed child bouncing off the bed rails was, frankly, indecent. And yet, there was tenderness, too. In many households, mothers wrote detailed notes about their children's sleep habits. One journal entry reads, "Edward will not rest. I fear his dreams are too vivid. Prepared lettuce tisane with grated apple. Held his hand till he drifted." There's something universal in that, isn't there? The quiet, aching hope that this time, they'll sleep. Some caretakers even prepared lettuce poultices for particularly fretful children. A gentle wrapping of the brow with leaves and lavender, one book suggested. The image is almost comic, small children trust-like produce, but it was done with care. And don't forget the morality tales. Victorian children were often told bedtime stories not to entertain them, but to correct them. Little Mary who wouldn't sleep and got snatched by the owls, or Timothy the Tired, who prayed too late. In those tales, sleeplessness wasn't just inconvenient, it was a slippery slope to perdition. You imagine a 7-year-old lying in bed, eyes wide, clutching a soft toy stuffed with straw, wondering whether staying awake another hour might invite divine punishment, or owls. In some cases, religious influence turned sleep into a sort of nightly test of virtue. Children were encouraged to say their prayers, drink their lettuce broth, and reflect on whether they had been obedient, kind, and moderate in their voice. No pressure. And still, they didn't always sleep. Because even in the most pious households, kids were still kids. They squirmed. They whispered. They snuck out of bed for a last biscuit or to check whether their pet mouse was still breathing. Sometimes they stared at the ceiling and wondered where God slept, or whether dreams had windows. And when they couldn't sleep, the adults reached once more for the leaves. Some families created lullaby routines around the tea. A sip of broth, followed by a slow rhyme. Green leaf, soft night. Bring my eyelids sleep so light. Fold my thoughts in gentle air. Drift me gently everywhere. It's not Shakespeare. But it worked, sometimes. Tonight, you imagine yourself as a child again, small and wriggly under a too-starched sheet. The air smells faintly of boiled lettuce and chimney smoke. You hear the faint creak of the floorboards as your nanny checks on you, then retreats. You whisper that lullaby to yourself, not because you need it, but because it's been a long day. And maybe your brain is acting like a Victorian child, distracted, oversugared, slightly afraid of owls. So you give it a gentle cup of lettuce, a soft rhyme, and a little grace. And wait. Tonight, your mind drifts toward the strange and delightful oddities the Victorians invented in their war against wakefulness. Because eventually, even the softest tea and warmest bath reach their limits. That's when the gadgets appear. You sit up in bed and imagine a Victorian catalogue of sleep aids, sepia-toned sketches of peculiar devices, each promising guaranteed repose, or slumber in 17 minutes. The illustrations are as detailed as the claims are dubious. There's the oscillating sleep cradle, a kind of adult rocking chair with a timed pendulum that gently sways the entire bed back and forth like a ghost with good manners. There's the sleep helmet, a softly padded dome laced with dried herbs, which you strap to your head and hope doesn't slip onto your face by 3 a.m. And yes, there were lettuce pillows. That's right. Small cloth sachets filled with dried lettuce leaves, sometimes blended with hops or lavender, tucked inside or beneath your actual pillow. The idea was that the aroma would seep through the cloth and lull you gently to sleep with its cooling vegetal influence. It's basically the 19th century version of a scented eye mask, but bumpier. You try one tonight. You've dried your own lettuce, slowly, in the oven, as advised by a dubious guide titled The Herbal Sleeper's Companion. You tuck it into a silk pillowcase and lay your head down. It rustles. A bit too loudly, honestly. But the rustling becomes part of the experience. You imagine it's rain falling gently on cabbage fields. You tell yourself that every noise is the sound of relaxation rearranging itself. Historians still argue whether any of these sleep aids had true scientific merit, but most agree that they worked simply because people believed in them. Which is half the battle, isn't it? Sleep arrives more easily when you've convinced yourself that you're doing the right things to summon it. There were also sleep tents, canopies that hung low over the bed, sometimes lined with lace or muslin soaked in herbal oils. The idea was to trap warm, calming scents around the sleeper's head like a dreamy greenhouse. One fashionable model was advertised as aromatic fortification against the night wind. You picture yourself inside one now, swathed in gently scented gauze, safe in your lettuce-scented cocoon. Outside, the world might worry. But inside, it smells like peace and salad. Some enterprising sleep entrepreneurs even developed lettuce lozenges, small candies made from boiled lettuce extract and sugar. For the gentle taming of nighttime chatter, the label read. Children loved them, adults pretended not to. And for those with more adventurous spirits, lettuce snuff. Ground, dried lettuce root meant to be inhaled gently before bed. It promised a light trance and was often paired with meditative music, usually played on a zither or wind harp. There's even one report of a gentleman who swore that sniffing lettuce before bed allowed him to dream exclusively in Latin. That seems unlikely, but impressive. Of course, many of these products were sold at apothecaries and female shops, early wellness stores aimed at ladies seeking relief from nervous exhaustion. The clerks would whisper recommendations like they were sharing government secrets. You'll want the new leaf vaporizer, madam. Keeps the air moist and the dreams domesticated. But not everyone bought in. There were skeptics, too. A few doctors scoffed at the gadgets and claimed that they only served to distract from deeper psychological ailments. That if someone truly needed a lettuce-filled headband to sleep, perhaps the issue wasn't lettuce-related. Still, no one was giving up their lettuce pillows. Because they were trying. And trying was something. Tonight, your own pillow smells faintly vegetal. Not unpleasant, just unusual. A whiff of something natural. Something old. You shift your weight, and the lettuce pouch crinkles softly beneath your ear. You think of all the other heads that once pressed into leaves for peace. There's something lovely about that shared search. The human desire to sleep better, feel softer, quiet the constant ticking. Across time, across class, across bed shapes and budgets, we've all tried to trick the brain into slowing down. And maybe your lettuce pillow won't solve everything. But it's one more layer of comfort. One more talisman. One more gentle nudge toward dreams. You close your eyes. Rustle. Exhale. Settle. The lettuce is listening. Tonight, your sleep is sponsored not by a London apothecary or your grandmother's journal, but by the sprawling fingers of empire. Because like most things in the Victorian era, the sleep remedies weren't just homemade, they were imported, too. Yes, the lettuce made its way across oceans. You find yourself in a colonial outpost, let's say British India. The air is thick and slow, heavy with incense and the sound of a distant sitar. The colonial bungalow creaks in the heat. A British officer lies awake, draped across a cot, staring at the mosquito net above his head. He cannot sleep, and naturally, he blames the climate. But the local physician, trained in both British medicine and native healing, offers something curious, a chilled infusion of local wild lettuce, blended with coriander seed and a touch of palm sugar. The officer scoffs, until he tries it. And then, his letters home are filled with gushing praise. Better than laudanum, he writes. A most curious but agreeable vegetal cordial. And just like that, colonial lettuce lore enters the British insomnia canon. This isn't fiction. The British Empire borrowed, or let's be honest, took, botanical knowledge from every region it touched. Local plants were studied, renamed, patented. Recipes were adapted, softened, and rebranded as discoveries. Historians still argue whether these were acts of cultural exchange or appropriation. Spoiler, it's both. But mostly the second. In Egypt, colonial doctors noted that Bedouin healers used lettuce seed oil as a calming rub. Back in England, this became Oriental Sleep Elixir, sold in cobalt glass bottles with gold leaf labels. Never mind that the seeds came from Wiltshire gardens and the oil was probably just almond with a hint of lettuce essence. You take a moment to breathe in this irony. The lettuce, once humble and British, now returns home wearing a turban and charging double. In parts of West Africa, missionaries observed elders drinking a blend of ground lettuce and baobab pulp before rest. They documented it in letters with a tone of scientific awe, but somehow still failed to see it as equally legitimate medicine. Back in Liverpool, a sleep tonic labeled Jungle Greens of Calm pops up in a beauty magazine, with zero mention of its origin. But don't let that cynicism sour the story, because even within these fraught dynamics, there's something undeniable: people, everywhere, were trying to rest. And across the empire, across class and culture, lettuce kept showing up. In Southeast Asia, colonial botanists discovered wild lettuce species growing in shaded groves. Locals brewed it into cooling teas during the hot season, particularly for children and elders who struggled with a fire in the belly, a phrase that was later translated, incorrectly, as nervous temperament. Victorian doctors took notes. By 1891, Malayan midnight tonic was all the rage in Glasgow. Of course, the label mentioned neither Malaysia nor any actual Malaysians. It did, however, have a lovely drawing of a sleeping tiger. You sip your own version tonight. Lettuce steeped with coriander, a touch of lemongrass. It's not traditional, not in any one culture's terms, but it carries the ghost of many. And that's the beauty of sleep rituals: they travel. Not always ethically, not always accurately, but persistently. Even now, there's a recipe from Jamaica where wild lettuce is boiled with cinnamon bark and soursop leaves, used to settle night mind. In the Pacific Islands, elders still blend lettuce with coconut milk and banana to create a thick evening porridge. In Morocco, lettuce seed tinctures are sold at market stalls under the name sleeping water. And in each of these places, the goal is the same: rest. Stillness. The restoration of a tired mind. Tonight, as you lie under your blanket, you think of all the people across time and space who reached for the same leaf. Some plucked it from gardens. Some bought it in glass jars. Some whispered to it. Others ground it into powder. It didn't matter whether they called it lettuce, salat, cause, salade, or la lechuga, the leaf spoke a language everyone understood. You are tired. Let me help. And isn't that something? Your own tea is nearly gone. You place the cup down gently. Outside, a breeze rises, brushing the curtains with fingers older than any empire. Tonight, you sleep in a world far wider than your room. Tonight, you sense a shift. A new breeze at the window. A cooler stillness in the room. And a faint, familiar doubt: is any of this really working? Welcome to the age of Victorian skepticism. Because eventually, even in an era that romanticized lace-trimmed poultices and sleep helmets made of lavender-stuffed linen, people began to ask hard questions. Questions like, is lettuce actually doing anything, or are we just politely pretending it is? You picture a drawing room full of doctors, bearded, stiff-collared, pens poised above ivory notebooks. They've started to suspect that boiled salad may not be the miracle cure they once believed. Enter the medical journals. Articles start appearing in publications like The Lancet and Medical Times and Gazette. A recurring phrase: insufficient evidence. One particularly blunt physician writes, "The efficacy of lacticarium as a soporific has been exaggerated by romantic botanists and impressionable ladies. In most cases, it is more salad than solution." Ouch. Historians still argue whether this wave of doubt was prompted by real clinical results or just the growing influence of modern pharmacology. But either way, the lettuce was losing its shine. Suddenly, more serious remedies were taking center stage. Electricity. Hydropathy. Even mesmerism, yes, the Victorian version of hypnosis. You could now visit a sleep clinic, where a man in a stiff waistcoat would wave magnets over your temples and insist you were cured. The lettuce poultice? Relegated to the status of charming folk remedy. Something your aunt still used, but that no self-respecting gentleman would admit to steeping after dark. You imagine a woman in her 40s, respected, well-read, carefully tearing up lettuce leaves in her kitchen, then hiding them under a towel when her physician neighbor drops by. Oh, this? For a soup. Smells medicinal. Does it? How strange. The truth is, the Victorians were conflicted. Part of them longed for science to solve everything with precision and speed. But another part, a softer, duskier part, clung to the slower world of plants and quiet rituals. And in that tension, lettuce floated. Some doctors began conducting small, awkward trials. One London physician boiled down 6 heads of romaine and fed them to 10 sleepless patients. 7 reported drowsiness, he noted, but 1 insisted he merely became nostalgic for gardening. Others claimed lettuce's only benefit was its monotony. If the mind focuses on the preparation, wrote one critic, it may forget to worry. Which, ironically, sounds a lot like mindfulness. But they didn't have that word yet. Still, commercial apothecaries fought back. They rebranded. No longer selling lettuce as a sedative, they began calling it a nervine, a digestive comfort, a botanical gentle for the female frame. Labels became vague. Ingredients were flexible. One popular tonic was named Leaf Dream, no mention of what kind of leaf, no proof it did anything, but it sold very well among anxious librarians. You sip your own tea tonight, no longer expecting miracles. Not expecting to vanish into dreamland within minutes. Just letting the warmth move through you. The way people always have. The way they did long before sleep was measured in cycles and REM charts. Because here's the thing. When the medical community began to frown at lettuce, ordinary people didn't stop using it. They just stopped talking about it. They tucked their rituals into quieter corners. Called them habits instead of treatments. One woman wrote in a letter to her cousin. The doctor says lettuce is mere sentimentality. But sentiment is what I need at 2 a.m. I shall continue to simmer my leaves, and he can continue to scowl into his microscope. And you know what? She probably slept better than he did. Tonight, the leaf sits calmly in your cup. No promises. No ego. Just warmth. Just breath. Just a familiar shape in a world that moves too fast. You think of how often we discard the gentle things too soon, because they're not powerful, not instant, not loud enough. And how sometimes, even when the world moves on, a humble leaf still waits on the windowsill. Waiting for you. Waiting to be trusted again. You're back under the covers now, and the air has that hush, the one that only shows up when the world's finally wound itself down. There's no clock ticking tonight. Or if there is, it's far enough away not to matter. All you hear is your own breath, and maybe the rustle of a leaf in your memory. You think about what's become of lettuce since its Victorian heyday. It's still around, obviously, probably in your fridge, tucked next to the condiments. But it's not special anymore. Not magical. Just a crunchy companion to chicken wraps and the occasional failed New Year's resolution. But once, lettuce had ambition. It sat proudly on the shelves of apothecaries and beneath the pillows of dukes. It inspired poems, patent applications, even bedtime rhymes whispered to wide-eyed children. Now, it's mostly underestimated. You say lettuce, and people think boring. Which, in a way, makes it perfect for sleep again. But back in the early 20th century, lettuce had a final chapter to write. As pharmaceuticals exploded in popularity, barbiturates, sleeping powders, and chemical sedatives with names that sounded like Sherlock Holmes villains, lettuce quietly bowed out of center stage. It retreated to the footnotes of sleep science, nudged aside by glossy new pills in color-coded boxes. Historians still argue whether this was progress or just branding. The herbalists tried to fight back. In 1923, a booklet titled The Sleepy Green Revival tried to reintroduce lettuce-based tonics to a modern world. The author, part gardener, part spiritualist, claimed that lettuce aligns the dream body with lunar harmonies. Critics laughed. Sales were poor. But a few desperate souls took up the cause again. War veterans with frayed nerves, housewives too jittery for sedatives, artists who liked their dreams unfiltered. Lettuce became niche. Not fashionable, not impressive, but trusted. And if you paid attention, you could still find it in dusty corners, sleepy time teas, natural remedy kits, bedtime blends named Moon Leaf or Garden Rest. You try one now. The packet says mild sedative. It smells like dried earth, chamomile, and nostalgia. The taste is fine. Honest. Unfussy. You sip slowly and think, lettuce never needed to be strong. It just needed to be there. By the 1960s, lettuce had been almost entirely replaced by lab-made sleep aids. Ads for pills promised deep, instant sleep. No dreams, no grogginess, just rest. Lettuce couldn't compete. It was too gentle. Too slow. But some doctors kept a soft spot for it. A pediatrician in rural Devon wrote in 1972. Sometimes, when nothing else works, I tell worried mothers to make their child a cup of lettuce tea. Not because I believe in the chemistry, but because a cup made with care, served warm, and sipped together at dusk, heals more than we know. And that's it, isn't it? The medicine was never just the lettuce. It was the ritual, the act of choosing stillness. Boiling the water. Waiting for it to cool. Holding the cup between your palms. Breathing. Hoping. In our modern world, we forget that slowness has its own magic. We want things now. Fast results. Instant download. Same-day delivery. But sleep? Sleep refuses to be rushed. And so, the lettuce lives on, not as a cure, but as a gesture. A soft hand offered to your overactive brain. A little green reminder that nature moves in spirals, not deadlines. Tonight, you sip, and you wait. You're not in a hurry. Sleep will come when it's ready. And in the meantime, the leaf keeps you company. Quiet. Patient. Present. Just like it always has. You lie still now, with your cup empty and your body folded gently into the mattress, and a final question floats across your mind like steam. Why do we keep chasing the same old remedies? Because even now, in your century of smartwatches and wellness apps, you still want what the Victorians wanted. Not just to fall asleep, but to feel soothed. To feel like you've done something kind for yourself at the end of a long, relentless day. And somehow, lettuce remains a part of that legacy. Tonight, you drift back through all the scenes we've traveled. Kitchens heavy with the scent of boiled leaves. Apothecary shops lined with tiny glass bottles. Nursery lullabies set to the rustle of lettuce broth. Factory workers sipping green tea like communion. Rich ladies wrapped in flannel and poultices, quietly panicking under their embroidered blankets. You see them all now. A patchwork of people, across time, all hoping for the same thing, to close their eyes, release their burdens, and float down into something soft. And in the center of that patchwork, a leaf. Not flashy. Not potent. Not guaranteed. Just gentle. Historians still argue whether lettuce ever deserved its sleepy reputation. But here's the quiet truth, it doesn't matter. Because the power of ritual, the act of saying, "I'm ready to rest now," carries more weight than most medicine. You've done the work. You've steeped the tea. You've read the books, boiled the broth, tucked a few crisp leaves under your pillow, metaphorically or otherwise. You've honored the tradition. You've joined the lineage of the sleepless and the hopeful. Maybe tonight's sleep will be deep. Maybe it will be brief. Maybe it will visit in waves. That's okay. You are not failing. You are practicing rest. And that matters. So tonight, let yourself remember, sleep is not a command. It's a slow arrival. Let it come in its own way, in its own time. Let it come like a faded recipe passed down in your grandmother's handwriting. Let it come like steam rising from a chipped porcelain cup. Let it come like leaves, floating gently in warm water, asking for nothing more than your breath and your patience. Let it come. And now, let's leave the story behind. Let your breath soften. Let your shoulders grow heavy. There's no more boiling. No more fussing. The lights are low, the world is quiet, and you, yes, you, have earned this pause. You don't need to remember the recipes, or the strange contraptions, or whether lead is truly cured anything at all. Let all of that float gently to the surface and then drift away, like steam curling into the air above a forgotten teacup. Feel the weight of the blankets, the stillness of the room, the steady beat of your heart, not rushing anywhere now. Let that sound anchor you. Let it tell your nervous system, you're safe. There is nothing else to do tonight. You've arrived at the far end of a journey that asked nothing more of you than presence, then curiosity, then breath. And now, you get to close your eyes, not to escape, but to surrender. To softness. To stillness. To the kind of sleep that doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be enough. Let the last thought settle like leaves to the bottom of a teacup. Let your body fall into the rhythm of rest. And if you wake, that's okay too. Sleep will come again. And again. And again. Because you've created the space for it. Because you remembered how. And because somewhere, a leaf is still floating. Waiting. Welcoming you back to sleep. Sweet dreams.